On this Wednesday, for yet another reset of patch 10.2.5, also possibly only 1 week away from patch 10.2.6, Blizzard threw at us 8 more hero talents to be previewed to us. We've got Warrior, Warlock, Rogue, Paladin, Druid, and Evoker for us in these new hero talents. Now, I'm not gonna go one by one showing every single one of these new hero talents on the assumption that either you don't play Balance or you don't play Guardian and therefore you have no idea about what any of this would mean anyway, or B, you already play Balance and you already play Guardian and probably you have been seeing these already. So pointing out to you that Moonfire deals 10% additional damage doesn't really mean much. What we do today for these hero talents being released is going over what were the more interesting points of each of these hero talents. Starting with the first one, alphabetically, the Eluna's Chosen for Druid, the cross between Balance and Guardian. These two, to be fair, for the Druid ones, both Eluna's Chosen and the Wildstalker are the more boring one, the more default one out of the ones shown. This one is, of course, arcane based, moon theme based, so of course you have more arcane damage for your Balanced Druid and more laser bear for Guardian. That's the gist of the set for Balanced Druid and Guardian Druid, synergizing around Fury of Elune for Balanced Druid and even spawning it for Guardian Druid, to the point where players are wondering if the talent tree for Guardian will be modified to add Fury of Elune as well as buffs to New Moon for Balance specifically and Lunar Beam for Guardian Druid. This will be, of course, one of the features of the expansion where you are basically pushed into playing a particular talent, perhaps a talent you weren't even playing before, which is the case for Guardian right here. Druids, Balanced Druids are already okay playing with New Moon. They are already doing it quite a few times, but Guardian has been basically abandoning Lunar Beam and the entire side around playing with arcane damage. So it's interesting that you have a talent tree that focuses on something that you have not been having the chance to play at all in this expansion, at least competitively. The more interesting part of the entire tree is the one for Balanced Druid, Lunar Calling, making your Starfire deal 40% more damage, but no longer triggering Solar Eclipse. So a talent to make you play basically only entirely around arcane damage, around the Lunar Eclipse and no longer the Solar Eclipse. That's the highlight in terms of interesting choices for Eluna's Chosen. Wildstalker, which is the cross between Feral and Resto, is the worst overall of all of the trees, and it's basically just a tree for cut weaving DPS restoration druids in Mythic Plus. That's what this is. This is very, very boring and very straightforward for Feral Druids. It's nothing but small percentage increases of damage in duration or in value, and the entire mechanic around creating an extra dot with Rip and Rake or an extra hot with Wild Growth, Regrowth and Efflorescence for Resto Druid, and that's it. It's basically a pseudo-adaptive swarm that you already have on your Druid, except now it's another instance of a dot that you have to track, which might be even more annoying. Unless it's completely passive, completely, in the background, you don't really have to keep track of this. It is still not that great. You also don't have many extra defensives, extra power in the defensives in this tree. We have seen it can happen. You can have some pretty nasty extra tankiness or utility bits in these type of hero talents. We haven't gotten them for the Wildstalker Druid. Now, while for Feral this is really boring, the one good thing for Resto Druid is that at least now you get some power back on your actual abilities. Compared to your other talent tree, which pushed you down even more your 3-ends playstyle, this one at the very least gives you some power into your actual healing rather than having everything done by your 3-ends instead. This tree, Scale Commander, is the mix between Augmentation and Devastation. A big win across the board on many tools for Devastation. First of all, finally you have now a 3-target cleave ability, which also feels better to play than Pyre in Disintegrate, now hitting 3 targets. On top of that, Empowering Disintegrate if it's only hitting 1 target, so it's very cool. Also, you have other cool things for Devastation in particular, which is the cooldown reduction on your Deep Breath, and turning Deep Breath into a damage cooldown, because now Deep Breath increases the damage of your essence abilities, like for example Disintegrate, of course, and also more damage from your bombardments, which will be the new mechanic of this hero talent, a chance to proc this AoE damage effect with your renamed Mass Disintegrate as a Devastation Evoker. So getting a second DPS cooldown is a pretty good addition for Devastation Evoker. For augmentation, the biggest bit of news about this set of talent trees is the fact that this talent also reduces the cooldown of Breath of Eons by 1 second for each target struck. Now this can be a problem, can become a balancing nightmare, because augmentation of course has a 2-minute cooldown on Breath of Eons, and then they play with interwoven threads, which reduces the cooldown down to 1 minute 48. So with this extra cooldown reduction, you might bring Breath of Eons down to a sub 130 cooldown, maybe even a 1 minute cooldown to Breath of Eons. So this will open way more windows on how and when you can use this cooldown. In particular, it could create some massive damage windows in Mythic Plus, for example. That's the biggest effect this will have for augmentation. Besides this, it's pretty good. There are no extra bonuses of damage you have to play around to buff your party as augmentation with this. You do have the bombardments, which are just passive. Every time you cast Eruption, they will come off by themselves sometimes, but besides that, it's just damage. This is an entire hero talent tree for augmentation that gives you just damage buffs. So it's not pushing you even more in the supportive style of augmentation. Instead, it's just more focused on damage and the possible problem of the cooldown reduction on Breath of Eons. Now for Paladin, we've heard different responses to this. The best one of the two is definitely Herald of the Sun, the cross between Holy and Ret, in particular for Holy. Because for Ret, for Ret, this is not nearly as impressive. It doesn't change nearly as many things about your toolkit. The whole playstyle is that now, when you use Holy Prism or Wake of Ashes, your next 2 Holy Power spenders create a sunspot on your target, which is basically just a hot or a dot, basically Holy Shock. It creates another Holy Shock. What is cool about this is that it opens multiple extra avenues for a Holy Paladin, for example, to go back to play with your spenders, finally. Over time, Holy Paladin has lost tons of value to their Light of Dawn and Word of Glory, to the point where sometimes you don't actually even press them because of how weak they have become. This is basically a hero talent set which ensures you have to play around your spenders, because they will now be giving you sunspots on your allies or on your enemies. You also have some feel-good features in this, like for example giving you stacking haste when you apply a sunspot, and whenever you use your wings, which is another one of the things that lost a lot of power for Holy Paladin, now you gain instantly 4 sunspots on nearby allies or enemies. So you can do something like Holy Prism, use 2 spenders and then activate wings and immediately get 6 sunspots, which equals 24% haste for 12 seconds, which is very good for having a feel-good cooldown, something that Holy Paladin has been missing quite a bit ever since the Avenging Crusader days of Season 1 of Dragonflight. So it's definitely gonna help much more the Holy Paladin version of this talent tree compared to the Ret Paladin one. The other one for Paladin is the Templar, the mix between Prot and Ret. Now this is very passive. It does have a very cool theme. You basically smack people in the head with a hammer. Every time you use one of your short cooldowns, Eye of Tear for Prot or Wake of Ashes for Ret, you turn that ability for 12 seconds into Hammer of Light that you can then use. And then every time you use this Hammer of Light, you spawn more hammers that slam on enemies over time, over 8 seconds. And then you have multiple ways to have more of these hammers to proc, chances to reset the cooldowns of some of your abilities. Most of this though is still themed around this hammer spam, both as Prot or as Ret. If we have to look at one of the best additions in this hero talent for Ret, is the fact that now you have some more damage diversity. One of the weak points of Ret, this expansion, has been having to switch from full raid single target to Mythic plus AoE. Doing top AoE damage weakened your single target significantly, doing higher single target weakened your AoE. While this entire hero talent does give you more single target plus AoE flexible type of damage for both AoE and single target. That's one of the better additions for Ret. For Prot, it's just a lot of damage. It's not too much defensiveness, not too much self-healing, and also not too many additions to your utility or to your tankiness like we have talked about even in the previous ones we have mentioned. There hasn't been too many additions in terms of utility. The biggest one was the extra movement speed that you can gain in your Divine Steed for Paladin, for example, but not much else for Prot Paladin, which is still cool since Prot recently has been lacking in damage by quite a bit. That's most of what you will get from this talent tree for Paladin. Then you have Rogue with Trickster, which has an interesting conundrum. Now, this entire talent tree has one major problem that Blizzard will have to address, which is Feint now grants you 2 combo points and quickly slashes with an unseen blade. Targets stuck by this blade are phased, and targets who are phased take 5% more damage from your attacks. And the entire tree will focus around extending the duration of phased on the targets, giving you bonuses if you're hitting phased enemies, etc, etc. But the whole problem begins at the start. Feint now does something for your damage. Why is this a problem? This is a problem because Feint is a defensive cooldown. You are supposed to be using Feint to prevent taking damage, not to do more damage. Now this is still partially okay for Subtlety because it has a 15-second cooldown. You have to, choose when to use it. You can't use it every time anyways, so it's still somewhat okay. The problem arrives when you're playing Outlaw. It is a problem because when you play Outlaw, you have already the ability to take even more damage reduction with Feint, making Feint reduce the single target damage you are taking by 20% on top of the 40% AoE damage you are reducing, which also gets increased even more with these talents because Feint can also reduce the AoE damage taken by an additional 10%. What is the bigger problem is this talent for Outlaw. Restless Blades now also reduces the remaining cooldown of Evasion and Feint by half a second per combo point spent, which can then guarantee an even higher uptime by taking Graceful Guile and giving you a second charge of Feint. Basically, for Outlaw, this means you can have Feint up all the times. You can have Feint proc this phased on enemies at all times, which feels a little bit unfair. You are creating an entire hero talent centered around this phased mechanic and this Feint used to trigger this unseen blade, except Outlaw will have a much easier time to proc this than a Subtlety Rogue. That's the only weird bit about this talent tree. Besides this, it feels like an okay set, a bit confusing, not particularly good for Outlaw. It forces you to play more with Killing Spree, which is not something you want to do. Another very short cooldown, very short duration buff you have to keep tracking as a rogue, as an outlaw, which might also add to the things you have to keep track of and things you have to spam in Feint to increase the damage of the carpal tunnel you will get from playing outlaw. Then you have Warlock. This has been one of the more praised one, the Diabolist for Destruction and Demo. Now, obviously, the biggest question mark is that this entire thing will be centered around spawning demons. It's a buff you gain that lasts for 20 seconds. When you spend soul shards, the duration is reduced by 1 second. So the faster you consume this buff at the end, once it expires, you summon a big demon. It will cycle between Overlord, Mother of Chaos, and Pit Lord, always in that order. Of course, this is very thematic for Demo. It has some very cool and powerful effects that you can synergize with, like reducing the cooldown of your Felguard by 30 seconds, putting the cooldown of your Felguard as the same cooldown of your Tyrant, 90 seconds. That's a very good addition. It is just overall more synergistic around your demons, which is more or less, I'm assuming, what most demo players want to see in their talent trees. What is more confusing, of course, is what does this all have to do with Destro, right? Why is Destro now summoning demons? Why is Destro summoning a Pit Lord? What does it have to do with the effects? It does also have some cool things for Destro, like making Cataclysm also more worthwhile in single target, for example. That's cool, but it's definitely not nearly as big of a fitting team for Destro than it is for Demo. So we will have to see what's the combination for Destro when paired with Affliction instead. The last of the talent trees that added was for Warrior. Colossus was the mix of Arms and Prot. Now this is basically the Fire-Ret legendary ability. You just spin around and do some AoE damage every 45 seconds. It's already a good start because it's more AoE for Arms. Arms is not particularly gifted at doing AoE, so this is a good start for an Arms Warrior. The extra power-ups to your AoE continue. AoE damage can be increased even more to Cleave and Whirlwind, doing upwards of 25% more damage in AoE, which is still also good. It looks like it will also play very well into your already something you want to do, stack Haste as an Arms Warrior, to benefit from the last capstone talent of this hero talent tree, Unstoppable Force, to give you stacks of Colossal Might up to 10 times, and if you gain a stack of Colossal Might when you are already at 10 stacks, the cooldown of Demolish is reduced by 2 seconds. So you cast Demolish, Demolish goes on a 45-second cooldown, and then you want to try to spam as many Mortal Strikes as you can to gain as many Colossal Might stacks as you can, because if you cap them past 10, you start reducing the cooldown of Demolish. That's kind of the whole thing for Arms Warrior. For Prot, for Prot, it doesn't have nearly as much besides the damage effects of this tool. You do have some bonuses to your defensiveness, but these are, these don't mean much because we don't really have the picture. Just reading that Ignore Pain prevents 15% more damage. Maybe next expansion, Protection Warrior is balanced by having a 15% nerf to Ignore Pain, so this is not really gonna change much of anything. You do have, much like Arms Warrior, more AoE damage, because Demolish is an AoE ability. You still have 25% more damage to your AoE abilities in AoE. So there isn't too much utility or too many defensive tools being added in this talent tree for Warriors either. But the highlight of the tree is definitely the Spinny ability, which is, by the way, not replacing Bladestorm. You still have your Spinny Bladestorm, now you also have your Spinny Demolish as an Arms Warrior. Now these were all of the 8 newly added hero talent trees. As mentioned, some of these were quite straightforward, basic damage increases or healing increases without changing too many things, too many features on your spec. Some of the more bright ones were the ones for the Evoker, especially for Devastation. The Herald of the Sun for Holy Paladin is also a pretty good one. You also have the possible issues around the feint spam with this hero talent for Outlaw Rogue, and the cool features of even more demons for Demonology Warlock with the Diabolist hero talents. So, with this recap of what has been given to us by Blizzard as a preview, which as always worth reminding, it's completely irrelevant, because by the time we get to the next expansion, most of this stuff will have been changed drastically. But, this was as much as the first impression goes, at least to see the idea, the direction Blizzard was looking for with these talent trees for each and every spec. So with this, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your reset day, I guess, in EU on this Wednesday. Starting the goodbyes, of course, by thanking all of the Patreon supporters, but also for everyone who is currently supporting for free, like liking and commenting down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these superficial things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I love it when people start drilling in their walls at 9 in the morning. Yeah, please go ahead.